Hi, and welcome to Historical Myths. Last time, if you listened to the first episode, I didn't have a name, just going on vibes. But now I've settled on that name, so not just royalty, but looking at a lot through history, which will give so much. We're never going to run out of anything to talk about. If you listened to the first episode, thank you so much. And have subscribers now, which is amazing. And so, in the spirit of having this new beginning and people listening and enjoying and getting great feedback, thank you all so much. I think I would do a disservice if I didn't do one of the most mythological political figures of all time, Rasputin. And so if it's your first time here, this is just a vibe. We're trying to make this as fun and just light as possible, although with myths during it darker, there's some things to talk about, but just imagine that we're just hanging out. Maybe we're on a nice cozy couch, you got some slippies on, maybe a nice cup of tea, what have you. I'm just a history enthusiast, I'm not a professor or a teacher or anything like that. This is just my own hobby, interest, and I just love researching and getting into history, especially when it comes to people that have been in power and have had all these things happen. It's just wild to me and immensely interesting. So, we will just go over a little bit about Rasputin's life, talk about the myths, and this will be an interesting one because there's more, I would say, gossip and not as cold hard facts as some other historical figures just because of who he was. So, should be a pretty fun one. So, as we get started, his name is Grigori Rasputin, born 1869. We don't have a date, so we can't do any astrology, unfortunately. But my biggest guess, and I would like to hear what other people think, I think we obviously have to say Scorpio, just because of everything that he is known for, which we will get into. Could also, I'm wondering if maybe Virgo too, because there's this like controlling aspect that can happen to Virgos. But anyway, we don't have that, but we have 1869. So we're thinking of the time period. There's already been a lot of revolutions happening to royal families around the world. France is free of it, America free of it. We're getting into industrial revolutions. So the time period is important too, because just like after the American Revolution, other places were kind of like, we could probably be free of this, especially if they're not doing what we don't like. And Rasputin, I feel like, and we will talk more about that, but I especially feel like he was one of the major components of why the Russian royal family was ended. If it was not for him, I don't see that it would have gone down the way it did. But I digress. So, just a little bit of his upbringing, which I found out so much interesting stuff. I've been reading and watching for years about Rasputin, but one thing I never recalled until the research for this episode was that he had a whole ass family. Like, he was married, had a wife, had a whole bunch of kids, just to a local peasant girl in Siberia. So he was born and lived in a village in Siberia, 1869. Um, and so it's a very interesting, humble beginning for someone who just seems to just be this like mythological person that I could never imagine being like a kid and having these like normal dad husband things to go on. Um, as this next piece of information will set the tone for a lot of information I'm going to bring up. There's a lot of stuff that is said about him that cannot be fact checked. So there's a legend that he stole horses for a living, but there are no police records to that effect. Some of that could be, 1800s, especially in Siberia, small village. Probably didn't really keep a lot of records. Don't know how many people were actually transcribing, reading, and writing everything that was happening. There could also be a small town vibe of the cop that's just like, Rasputin stealing horses again, no good, and just moving on, like very Officer Krumke, West Side Story vibe. Like it's just like that dang Rasputin at it again. Like just who knows what was really going on. So just because there's no police record, I'm gonna give a pass on that. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not gonna totally debunk this one yet. And so while he was coming into his own as a family man, he became an unordained holy man and faith healer, which is interesting. Unordained. It was just vibes. And so it's noted that he did several pilgrimages, but didn't adhere to an ascetic lifestyle, meaning he didn't forego earthly and material pleasures like a lot of holy men do. Uh, One of the more notable are monks that give up a lot of earthly material things, and especially notable in Rasputin's case, earthly or sensual pleasures. So he was like, I'm a holy man, but I'm going to still get down, which is a choice to make, but it didn't hinder him because look, we're talking about him now over 100 years ago. So we're already starting with conflicting reports by historians. There are some that think he was part of this extreme religious sect that was in Siberia and known to be sexually promiscuous and flagellant to flay. Um, and they were known as Khlysti, KhlYsti. And one historian in particular, British one named Andy Wood, seems to think Rasputin was indoctrinated into the sect. Now, there's lots of heavy debate and rumors about this. No one can seem to prove whether he was or not, because there's a lot of historians that dispute this. In particular, one Simon Montefiore, who stated in his work Rasputin was not a member of the sect and denied any connection, end quote. So a lot of other historians have repeated that too, that this is just hearsay. So we're already getting off to a rocky start. We don't really know anything about him, but somebody that comes to this level, it's probably better in their favor that people can't really tell what's real or not because they won't see you coming. And now, what actually has more factual basis that a lot of historians agree on is that during his travels, Rasputin had been known for reading people psychologically and offering them suitable advice. And sometimes this was combined with vague religious speech sprinkled with biblical quotes and proverbs. So think of any of, I'm immediately reminded of some daytime psychics or, um, fame mediums where they're just kind of reading the room like a Sylvia Brown. Honey, the land. That was my Sylvia Brown impersonation. If you don't know her, look her up because I'm also fascinated with her too, but I digress. Um, so a lot of people seem to agree and feel like it's valid that he kind of had this psychological insight into people and could kind of connect with what they needed or needed to hear, and that made people feel very receptive to him. Now, in terms of his appearance, everyone, I mean, we have pictures too. You just go on, search pictures of Rasputin, they're insane. Like, he does have a hypnotic stare. He's reported as being very striking in person because he was very tall with a long beard, long hair, but seemed to be neatly groomed and like coiffed. So you have someone like that and has like a piercing gaze, like even through these pictures that were taken over 100 years ago, you can still tell it's like a very intense stare, which garnered either people feeling uncomfortable or drawn to him. I remember years ago watching a History Channel talking about Rasputin, and they were alluding to Rasputin possibly having the effect of hypnosis, which was attributed to a German physician named Franz Mesmer, who died in the early 1800s, which could have made its way to Rasputin, likely because he traveled a lot and learned a lot. But the founder, Franz Mesmer, had something calling mesmerize, which we get from that word. And he believed that there was an existence of a natural energy in all animate people and beings, also known as an animal magnetism, that when free flowing in the body and not blocked, could produce an effect that induced a trance like state in other beings that allowed for healing, which then evolved to be modern hypnosis. But he seemed to believe it was the one's own body and own energy like substance, almost electricity. So again, the vibe, the energy. And I would not be surprised if Rasputin used this too, which we will touch on because there's a specific story that I think that he was involved in would touch on this. So he's doing all this trance like stuff with the whole family. And then we kind of don't know how he got to Russia, but he makes his way to Russia. And in total scam artist, cult leader fashion, he's just staying with a bunch of rich, wealthy people that are allowing him because of his services. So he's not really paying for anything. It it's been well documented from back then that people that met him, especially women, found him charming because he was always like touching them or having some kind of movement with his words, like a lot of gesticulation. He was always like kissing women. So there was a sensuality, this charm to him that maybe it was the use of mesmer. Maybe that was making people feel good and more amenable to say, hey, stay at my house. It's cool. Um, so he gets to St. Petersburg in 1903, and while he's living off this charity of other people, more wealthy people, he becomes associated with the Romanovs, who are the doomed final royal family of Russia. And this is notable because in 1905, when he became associated with the Romanovs, they had just had their fifth child, who was the first boy, the only son heir to the throne, and he suffered from hemophilia, which is a rare blood disorder. And this was not good optics wise for the Romanovs because at that time, if you're going to be the czar or the king, the people want you to be perceived as strong, physically strong, powerful, because you're also commanding armies, you're also leading. And people that were sick or had chronic illness were not perceived favorably, especially if you were in a position of power. It was seen as not good and didn't instill any faith. So they wanted to keep the secret, and they were scared because of what would happen if it got out. So enter in Rasputin, who, oh, I should also mention the Russian people already had some hate for Alexandra, who was the wife to Tsar Nicholas II, the mother of Alexei, the only son heir, because she was British. She was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria. So you have a non Russian in the royal family, not looking great so far, never really been a good look for royal families when they bring in someone from a different country. The vibe is already in the toilet, so to speak. So they meet Rasputin, and I say Alexandra, she really seemed to be taken with him because of this effect he had on people and being known as a faith healer. So he was encouraged to work with Alexei, the son, to see if can improve his condition. What we will say for Rasputin is remarkably, he was able to have some positive effect on Alexei. And there were two notable times. There was one where Rasputin told Alexei's doctors to stop giving him aspirin because it wasn't going to help. Now, aspirin is known to thin the blood, which is bad if you have a clotting disorder. You don't want more thinning happening. You want more clotting. You don't want to lose any more blood. Did he know this? Is my question, and this is a rhetorical question, but let me know what you think. I have not been able to find anything concrete on his medical training. It all seems to be more religious and maybe energy healing. So, was this just a wild guess? Was he just super confident in himself? Or did he actually know that aspirin was thinning the blood and would make this kid's condition worse? Either way, it worked. It helped a lot, and Alexei lived to see longer than what was expected. The second incident was Alexei had an accident that was really, really bad, and they almost thought he was going to die. Like, obituaries were being written up, he was bleeding, and Rasputin would take time and go see Alexei and just be there with him and offer comfort. And this seemed to make him better, and he recovered. Also notable is all these times that Alexei had these terrible bleeding episodes. Whenever Rasputin would send a telegram like, he's going to be fine. I am extremely paraphrasing. Please don't take this as quotes. Uh, he would send telegrams that would say, hey, don't worry about it. He's going to be fine. Or he would be in the room with Alexei and be like, everything's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. And since he always was, they were like, dang, he must know something. So this made his favor go extremely high up with the royal family, particularly Nicholas II and Alexandra. But that was making their reputation with the Russian people just drop even lower, to the point that there were many attempts on Rasputin's life to assassinate him. And this could be from a few factors. Again, these are a lot of myths. We can't really say how much is real, but he was perceived as a holy man to the royal family, but there were so many alleged reports of him going to brothels, of him groping women, of him like drinking lots of like alcohol, just getting horrendously drunk, just, and even one there's even one myth that says that he got so drunk and he was alluding to the fact that Alexandra was so tight with him because there had been relations between him. Let's just say this is going up on YouTube, so I'm trying to be careful. But he insinuated that they had been spending a lot of time together intimately, and whether this was true or not, it was still a rumor that was not adding to anybody's favor. So a bunch of guys were plotting, really. Like an old beggar woman stabbed Rasputin in the stomach at one point and he survived. So it's giving superhero story arc. It's like, dang, he just will not die. Like, they're getting more mad about it. And they're doing all these attempts, and he keeps surviving until finally, in 1916, they invite him to dinner, Rasputin. So these three men all have ties to the Romanovs. There's like Nicholas II's niece, his husband is one of them. So they're not just random uh, people in St. Petersburg. Like this is the call is coming from inside the house. So these three men invite him over to dinner. Allegedly, they poisoned a whole bunch of food and dessert with cyanide, and he didn't die. There are reports of this, but toxicology came out of his body, Rasputin, after he did die, and they did not find any traces of poison. So it's definitely an X file for sure. Like, was this just a rumor or did it really happen? And his body just didn't, was like, no. Well, at that point, the men were just frustrated and they just started shooting. And he did die from a fatal gunshot to the head, which would take pretty much everybody out. And here's more myth is that after he was shot in the head, there were alleged reports that he still wasn't fully dead until they dumped his body in a frozen river. And his body was found days later when the river started to thaw. It's wild stories before death, after death. And what I think also makes him such a powerful mythological creature is a few things that he said before he died, which were kind of like, ooh, interesting. And they did come to pass. The one said in 1914, when he told Nicholas II, the Tsar of Russia, if you get involved with the First World War, this is the end for Russia, which turned out to be true because no more than 3 years after Russia helped in the First World War, the revolution happened. All the royal family was executed. You had Lenin come into power. And Russia's just been not the same since. Uh, Extreme poverty through most of the 20th century, just like really, really difficult. So that was the linchpin in Russia's history for just making the country a lot harder to live in. And one other thing he said was that Nicholas II and the whole royal family would not survive 6 months after his death. And even though he wasn't exact, he wasn't that far off. It was a little less than 2 years after his death, the whole royal family was executed. So, boom, mic drop. Like, it's kind of wild how much you hear that Rasputin was like a scam artist, but there are a couple of things that he turned out to be right in, particularly stop using aspirin to treat clotting blood disease, which almost every medical professional will agree now. He also foretold Russia's demise after the First World War. and that the Russian family would not survive very long after he himself died. Just a story about fate and luck, and if Alexandra had not been married into the Russian family, which at this point, the Russian family had no traces of hemophilia ever, but just by coincidence or fate, who knows, she married in and had a son that had hemophilia right as the time that Rasputin came to St. Petersburg. So, had Alexei not been born with this disorder, had Rasputin not come there, would we have had the downfall of this royal family in the time and way we did? Don't know. It's wild that these things work out in this way. And on the topic of the royal family, I'm just getting an idea. I might do an episode of Anastasia, who has been hinted at and rumored to be the one child that escaped from the execution of the family. But we'll see. Either way, reflecting on everything going over today, was he a madman, Rasputin? Was he a guru? Was he a mad monk? I will say he had powers, but I believe the powers came from reading people. It's very intuitive on the level of what would now be considered a psychic or an intuitive healer. But with all the other reports and shenanigans he was doing, he might be someone who used his gifts for self-serving purposes. So, like a medium or a psychic of today's standard who is just very good at reading people and putting things together in a way that makes sense and helps people. But it does seem that there were a lot of reports of what he was doing was not somebody not fully doing this just out of altruism. There was clearly a lot more self-serving purposes than just having a place to stay. It was giving a little exploitation, as well as someone I do think was probably at least intuitively, if not psychically, gifted. So two things can be true at the same time. And there you have it. That's Rasputin. Very interesting deep dive. I had to do a lot more research because not a whole lot of receipts. So overall, great for the historical myth format. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening, especially if you got to this point. We took some zigs, we took some zags, but I think I learned more about Rasputin, and I hope you did too. Thank you so much for listening. I have been Angelique Porter, your host, and I will see you in the next one. I hope you have a great day wherever you are. Bye-bye.